An elderly woman with silvery hair neatly gathered into a tidy bun entered the Jiu-Jitsu Academy hall. Her kimono was impeccably pressed. "Get out of here, old lady," sneered the coach David Johnson, provoking laughter among the students present. However, when he called Helen Simmons for a sparring session, no one anticipated what would unfold next, especially not himself. Helen carefully folded her pristine white kimono and placed it into a worn-out sports bag. At 72 years old, her movements appeared slow but were incredibly precise. A lifetime of discipline was evident in every gesture she made. She ran her fingers over the faded black belt. The frayed edges of the belt held memories of 40 years spent training on the tatami mats. The morning rays filtered through the windows of her modest apartment. Helen had moved here just 3 weeks ago after her husband's passing. Starting over was difficult, but she never allowed circumstances to break her spirit. After unpacking and settling into her new place, the only task left was to find a spot where she could continue her long-standing practice. "The joints won't warm up on their own," she whispered, wincing from the pain upon rising. The doctor had been firm. "Move, or you will start to fade away." For Helen, the choice was clear. Looking in the mirror, she saw her neatly tied silvery hair and a face etched with wrinkles that told stories of a rich life. Yet, her eyes remained sharp and lively. She nodded to herself silently. This was the quiet ritual marking the beginning of every training session she had. In 1980, when she was 28 years old, she stepped onto the tatami for the first time. Few were aware of Helen Simmons' extraordinary journey in jiu-jitsu. Under the guidance of a skilled mentor, Thompson, she dedicated 15 years to refining her skills and earned her black belt during a period when female participation in this sport was exceptionally rare. While raising 2 children and supporting her husband's career, who was the director of a school, she never abandoned her training and ultimately reached the 2nd Dan rank. This was not something to boast about openly. Her knowledge had become an integral part of her body, evident in her reflexes and the calm confidence with which she navigated through life. The first day at the new dojo reminded Helen Simmons of when she took her car keys for the first time, like returning to riding a bicycle. The commute to the Academy of Elite Martial Arts lasted only 15 minutes. The building appeared imposing, with large windows and a modern sign. The spacious parking lot was filled with luxury vehicles. Among the shiny SUVs and sports cars, her modest sedan seemed out of place. Helen noticed young people dressed in trendy athletic wear, fit and energetic, aged roughly between 20 and 30. Adjusting her simple white kimono, she stepped out of her car. At the reception desk sat a young woman with perfect hair and a skeptical gaze. She scanned Helen and asked with a hint of doubt, "How may I assist you?" Helen answered clearly and confidently, "I want to enroll in a jiu-jitsu class." The woman's eyebrows lifted slightly as she explained, "Our classes for adults tend to be quite demanding. Perhaps a course designed for seniors on Tuesday mornings would suit you better." Helen smiled gently and replied, "I have been practicing jiu-jitsu for over 40 years. I want to keep training." For a brief moment, doubt flickered across her face, but she quickly regained a professional expression and added, "In just 15 minutes, a free training session begins. Beginners can watch and then speak with the instructor to get an assessment of their skills." Helen Simmons nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Now we need to complete these papers." She handed over several forms. "The coach, David Johnson, will verify your abilities." Helen signed calmly, without paying attention to the wary look she received. On her way to the locker room, she felt the administrator's curious gaze, probably wondering what an older woman was doing here. Helen smiled quietly to herself. This was far from the first time she had been underestimated. The main hall of the academy was spacious and bathed in light, equipped with new gear and impeccably clean mats. Around 20 students were already warming up. Their movements were precise and swift. The sound of footsteps hitting the mats and steady breathing filled the room. Helen studied everything carefully. All the techniques were familiar to her, since she had practiced them many times. The academy looked respectable and exactly as she had imagined. Suddenly, she spotted the chief mentor, Arthur Johnson, about 35 years old, tall and a sturdy man, moved with almost unwavering confidence, carrying a hint of superiority. His blue kimono was adorned with numerous badges, and his black belt was tied impeccably. He calmly walked around the hall, adjusting stances, demonstrating techniques, and earning respectful nods from students. When David Johnson's gaze met Helen Simmons's, it held for a moment. His expression shifted from surprise to a smirk with a touch of mockery. He addressed a student with a purple belt, who glanced briefly at Helen Simmons and snorted dismissively. Ignoring this, Helen stepped onto the tatami and bowed, following the dojo's etiquette. Gradually, the noise in the room settled as all eyes turned toward an elderly woman in a white kimono. David Johnson's voice echoed across the hall. "How may I assist you, ma'am? It seems you have come to the wrong class. Tai Chi for seniors is held in the smaller room at the corridor's end," he answered. A controlled wave of laughter rippled through the space. Helen remained composed and firmly stated, "I have come for jujutsu lessons. I recently moved to the city and am looking for a place to continue training." David Johnson exchanged looks with several senior students. The story continues. Some experienced students smiled as David Johnson's grin widened. "Training at your age?" He did not hide his skepticism. "No harm meant, ma'am. But jujutsu is a discipline requiring serious physical fitness. We have." The focus was clearly on training for competitions. "I'm familiar with what jujutsu is," Helen Simmons replied calmly. "I have been practicing it since the 1980s. This sparked another round of reserved laughter. David Johnson switched to a more condescending tone. "Listen, grandmother," he emphasized the word. So, there were giggles again in the gym. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we do not have time to train beginners who might injure themselves due to inexperience." Helen did not move. Her gaze stayed fixed on him. "I understand your concern, but I assure you I can handle it. Can you even stand up from the floor without help?" came a voice from someone with a blue belt, prompting another wave of laughter. David Johnson raised his hand, trying to quiet the noise, though it was clear he himself struggled to hold back a smile. "And what belt are you backing your words with?" he asked, stressing the word backing. "I'm not backing anything," Helen Simmons replied calmly. "I earned my second Dan from Master Hiroshi Thompson in 1995. Most students probably did not recognize the name, but a brief change flickered across David's face. Thompson was a legendary figure in certain circles, although he did not seek wide fame. David quickly composed himself. Those were different times back then. Now the standards have changed significantly. He gestured toward the spectator area with feigned politeness. "Why don't you watch the class from there? Maybe then you will understand if this level of intensity suits you." The refusal was firm. It was obvious, disguised as concern, yet filled with clear disregard. Several students were already smiling openly, enjoying the moment as the elderly woman was put in her place. However, Helen Simmons had not dedicated 40 years to the tatami to back down so easily. "I did not come here to just watch," she said, her voice carrying a quiet but undeniable strength that instantly silenced the room. "I came here to train." David Johnson's smile vanished for a moment. He clearly did not expect such resistance. The entire audience focused intently on the unfolding scene. They exchanged glances, their laughter turning into curiosity. "Madam," David Johnson began, in a tone usually reserved for explanations to children, "we must follow insurance company requirements and safety regulations. I cannot allow someone in your condition into the advanced group without a prior evaluation." Helen Simmons nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense." "Then assess me." A soft chuckle rippled across the room. David Johnson crossed his arms over his chest, his smile returning. It was clear he enjoyed being the center of attention. "You want me to evaluate you?" he asked, theatrically raising an eyebrow. "That is precisely why I came," Helen answered calmly. David Johnson turned to the students and dramatically shrugged. "Well then, it seems today's schedule will change. We will carry out a special assessment," he declared. He gestured to a young man wearing a blue belt. "Mike, come here and help." Mike stepped forward willingly, smiling as David Johnson addressed Helen once again. He said, "This is Mike Peterson, one of our intermediate students. If you truly want to train with us, you need to at least prove you can handle basic sparring." Helen calmly met his gaze. "I would prefer to work with you, Coach David Johnson." Silence filled the gym. Someone whispered softly, "Behind you." David's expression shifted. The sneer vanished, replaced by a colder look. With a slight edge, he asked, "Are you talking to me?" Dropping his earlier arrogance, Helen replied, "If you intend to test my skills, do it properly. You are the head instructor, aren't you?" The challenge hung in the air, marking a new chapter in their interaction. David found himself in a difficult spot. Refusing meant losing face, but accepting meant fighting a woman who could be his grandmother. Either way, the situation slipped beyond his control. After a brief pause, his confidence returned. This was his chance to show how he handled awkward moments. He planned a short demonstration to politely make it clear this was not her place. "All right," he said with a smile. "We will have a light demonstration sparring. Just 3 minutes to check your agility." He turned to the students. "Please clear the center mat." The young people quickly arranged themselves around the edges, leaving the middle open. David Johnson removed his instructor badge and prepared to begin. David Johnson deliberately placed it aside. Helen Simmons stepped onto the tatami. Her movements appeared unhurried, yet remarkably smooth for her age. "I will move very carefully," David announced loudly to the audience. "Only basic positions without any painful holds." "Are you ready, Mrs. Simmons?" he asked. "Ready, Coach," Helen replied. The trap was set. "Let's begin," David said as he assumed the starting stance. Silence filled the room. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the unusual duo standing in the center of the tatami. David circled slowly. His motions were deliberately controlled and tailored for the crowd. "Now, we will practice fundamental positions," he declared loudly, clearly playing to the audience. "In jiu-jitsu, leverage is key, not strength," he emphasized, making the sport accessible to all body types. Helen Simmons reached for his sleeve, intending to demonstrate a simple grip technique. Events unfolded so rapidly that later, the students could not retrace the exact sequence of what had happened. As soon as his hand touched her kimono, Helen subtly shifted her body. Her palm gripped his wrist with unusual force. While Arthur Johnson tried to grasp the situation, she flawlessly executed a sleeve hold, disturbing his balance and forcing him to step forward. It was a classic setup, and he fell right into the trap. In the next moment, Helen dropped to the floor and quickly extended her legs forward, hooking his ankle. At the same time, shifting her position. From grabbing the sleeve to the collar, she pulled him towards herself with smooth yet powerful motion. The move was precise and devastatingly effective. Arthur, completely stunned, collapsed forward. The moment his knees touched the mat, Helen had already assumed the technical mount position, which was a true surprise. A 72-year-old woman facing a black belt in his prime. A collective gasp echoed through the gym. "What is this?" Arthur started, losing his composure and trying to regain control. However, Helen had already moved on to the next phase. Her hands moved with flawless accuracy, securing holds that could not be broken without skilled technique. Arthur, still recovering, made a classic beginner's mistake and pressed directly against her. This was exactly what the seasoned fighter was waiting for. Helen's response was instantaneous. Her actions were precise and faultless. She redirected his force, creating an opening for a classic arm lock. David Johnson realized the danger too late. He attempted to stand and pass the guard, but found himself caught in a perfectly executed hold. The submission was locked in before he could mount any defense. His arm was completely controlled by Helen Simmons. The pressure increased until he had no other option left. "I give up!" Arthur Johnson shouted, slapping the mat with his free hand. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. Silence fell over the academy. The students stood frozen, mouths agape in amazement. The elderly woman had just achieved something remarkable. Under the guidance of their formidable head coach, she executed the move with such skill, it seemed worthy of a training video. Helen immediately released the hold and, with a surprising grace for her age, rose effortlessly. She adjusted kimono and bowed respectfully to David Johnson, who remained kneeling, his face a mixture of shock and confusion. "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself, Coach Johnson," she said calmly. "I hope this has cleared any doubts about my abilities." No one dared utter a sound. Something extraordinary had occurred, and everyone present witnessed the moment unfold. David slowly rose to his feet, his face burning with embarrassment and bewilderment. A heavy silence filled the training hall. The students were too stunned to even whisper among themselves. The image of an invincible mentor shattered in mere seconds. "Who are you?" he finally forced out, his voice softer now, devoid of any irony. "I told you," Helen Simmons replied calmly, adjusting her belt. Helen Simmons held a second-degree black belt and was a student of Master Thompson. One of the senior students stepped forward, his eyes flashing with recognition. "Wait, Thompson, the very same Thompson who trained champions in the 1990s. And you are Helen Simmons." Helen nodded modestly. "I was merely one of his pupils." "One of his pupils," the young man exclaimed, his voice tinged with excitement. "But you were his top athlete. I read about you in old martial arts magazines. You won 3 times. The title of champion of the Eastern region sent a whisper through the room. David Johnson's expression shifted from embarrassment to understanding. "That was a long time ago," Helen Simmons said quietly. "I never aimed for fame. For me, the practice itself was always what mattered." David Johnson cleared his throat, clearly attempting to compose himself. His pride had been touched. Yet years of training had taught him to be at least somewhat humble, even if only occasionally. He took advantage of this. "Mrs. Simmons," he said with a formal bow, "I apologize for my disrespectful behavior. It was unworthy of an instructor." Helen gave a slight nod. "We all tend to judge by outward appearances," he added. "It is part of human nature. The key is being ready to reconsider our views when new facts come to light." A girl with a purple belt stepped forward. "Mom, that transition to the armbar was truly amazing. Could you show it again?" Helen looked at David Johnson, raising her eyebrows slightly. He paused for a moment, then nodded in agreement. "I believe today we have a chance to learn a great deal," he said, with genuine respect in his voice. If Helen Simmons had no objections, the next hour, which was supposed to be a regular training session according to the plan, unexpectedly turned into an impromptu masterclass. Helen demonstrated techniques with the precision earned through decades of experience. Her movements were no longer as swift as in her youth, but her sense of timing and control remained flawless. The most striking aspect was her ability to clarify subtle nuances that transform ordinary movement into genuine art. a gentle lean that enhances control over the situation, the correct weight distribution, and patience during transitional moments. All these elements were illuminated with true expertise. Arthur Johnson, it must be acknowledged, engaged wholeheartedly, asking insightful questions and assisting in demonstrating techniques. His initial embarrassment gradually gave way to sincere admiration. He began to realize what a priceless legacy resided in his training hall. After 44 years of practice, Helen Simmons explained, while executing a complex guard move, I learned that jiu-jitsu is not about strength or speed. Those fade away. The key is to grasp the unchanging principles like leverage, timing, balance, and most importantly, respect for your opponent and yourself. The students listened with bated breath. Old derisions vanished. Something rare and valuable was brewing in their dojo, and they sensed it deeply. By the end of the session, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Those who had recently mocked Helen's presence now approached her with questions. Genuine interest was palpable in every exchange. Renewed respect echoed through the air once again. She responded calmly and attentively, without a hint of arrogance, generously sharing her profound knowledge. David Johnson stood at the edge of the mat, thoughtfully observing the unfolding scene. When the last student concluded their conversation with Helen Simmons, he stepped forward once again. "Miss Simmons," he began, his voice losing its previous forced confidence. "I would like to offer you a position on our elite team." Helen raised her eyebrow in surprise, not expecting such a proposal. "We have several programs designed for women and children, and your expertise would be invaluable to them," continued David Johnson. "I did not come here looking for a job, Coach Johnson," Helen replied. "I simply needed a place to continue my training." David nodded. "Of course, you will have unlimited access to the gym at any time, but I still hope you will agree to share your knowledge. Even if you conduct just one session a week, it would be a tremendous help to the students." Helen considered this unexpected turn. Her plan that morning was only to find space for training, maintain her fitness, and perhaps discover a new community in an unfamiliar city. "I will think about it," she finally said. "But only if I can train here regularly," David Johnson quickly responded. "Any condition is achievable. This dojo must remain a place of genuine respect. For every person who enters, regardless of age, gender, or appearance," her gaze stayed steady and confident. "Today's incidents must not happen again to those who come here to learn." David nodded, accepting the gentle reproach with surprising maturity. "This is a principle I have been obliged to follow from the very beginning, I promise." When Helen Simmons packed her belongings, several students respectfully bowed to her. This gesture was usually reserved for the chief instructor. "See you on Thursday, Sensei Simmons," said a young girl wearing a violet belt. Her voice carried a note of hope. Helen smiled. Thursday would be perfect. As she approached the exit, she noticed a small group of elderly people curiously peering through the glass into the reception area. They had managed to catch part of her impromptu lesson and were animatedly discussing what they had witnessed. Earlier, the skeptical administrator approached her with a guilty expression. "Mom, several people have been asking if we offer classes for more mature students in KHM. They want to know if you will be teaching," she said. Helen's smile grew wider. "Tell them to come on Thursday," she replied. "We will see what we can arrange." 3 months later, the elite martial arts academy had undergone significant changes. What was once a training ground for young competitive athletes had transformed into a diverse and welcoming community. Twice a week, Helen conducted a now popular foundational lesson open to all ages and skill levels. The focus was not on athletic achievements, but on the timeless technical fundamentals of jiu-jitsu that Helen Simmons had refined over many years. Remarkably, these classes became the most sought-after sessions in the academy's schedule. Young students quickly realized that mastering the basics was key to their progress. Under Helen Simmons' guidance, the trainees showed clear progress, significantly enhancing their skills. The older students, in particular, appreciated her structured and meticulous method that allowed them to improve safely without fear of injury. What stood out most was that David Johnson himself constantly took part in Helen's sessions, often acting as her partner during demonstration exercises. Initially, he felt uneasy, but soon developed genuine respect and a strong desire to learn. On one occasion, he shared with a local newspaper reporter covering their unique coaching duo, "Helen has forgotten more about pressure control than we could ever imagine." That day, a small internal tournament was being held at the academy, where fighters of various ages and skill levels competed. Helen and David served as referees. During breaks between matches, Helen demonstrated essential techniques with David's assistance, carefully explaining the key points to the audience. "Notice how leverage, not brute force, creates the opportunity to submit," she said slowly, showcasing a precise armbar on David. "This move suits people of all ages and body types, as long as it is performed correctly." Among the spectators was a focused group of seniors, unofficially called the Silver Belts, within the academy. This ever-growing community of older practitioners was deeply inspired by Helen Simmons' story. As one of the senior instructors admitted, she turned everything upside down. For an observer, this mattered deeply not only for the older students, but for every one of us. Helen reminded everyone what truly holds the highest value in jiu-jitsu. From the center of the tatami, Helen noticed a new visitor, an elderly man leaning on a cane. His appearance suggested hesitation, yet there was a firm resolve shining in his eyes. She smiled, recognizing in his demeanor the same uncertainty she had felt 3 months earlier. Coach David Johnson caught her glance, followed it, and immediately approached to personally welcome the newcomer, leading him to a seat with a respectful bow. Helen reflected that some lessons extend far beyond the technical moves on the tatami. If this story has touched you, remember appearances can deceive, and wisdom arrives in many different forms. Have you ever been underestimated or witnessed someone being unfairly judged? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss inspiring tales that encourage seeing the deeper meaning. Tell us which city you are from and which part of Helen's journey resonated with you the most. Until next time, and always remember, respect is earned and never demanded. True mastery shows through actions, not words. The oldest tree in the forest has the strongest roots. An elderly woman with silver hair neatly tied in a bun entered the Jiu-Jitsu Academy hall. Her kimono was impeccably pressed. "Get out, old lady," someone sneered, Coach David Johnson, causing laughter among the students. However, when he challenged Helen Simmons to a match, no one expected what would come next, especially not him. Helen calmly folded her pristine white gi and placed it into a worn-out sports bag. At 72 years old, her movements were deliberate, yet perfectly precise. A life dedicated to discipline showed in every gesture. She ran her fingers over the old black belt, whose edges were frayed, holding secrets of 40 years spent on the tatami. Morning light poured through the windows of her modest apartment. She had only moved in 3 weeks ago after her husband's passing. Starting over was difficult, but Helen never gave up when facing hardships. After unpacking and settling down, only one task remained: finding a place to continue her long-standing training. "My joints won't just loosen on their own," Helen murmured with a frown of pain as she stood. The doctor had been blunt. "Keep moving, or you will start to lose your sight." For Helen, the choice was clear. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, a neat bun of silver hair, a face marked with wrinkles that told stories of experience, yet bright, lively eyes. She nodded to herself, performing that silent ritual, which began every training session since 1980, when she first stepped onto the tatami at 28. Few knew about Helen's remarkable journey in jiu-jitsu. She trained for 15 years under Master Tarasov and earned her black belt in that time. The era when women were rarely seen in this sport seemed distant now. Raising 2 children and supporting her husband's career as a school principal, she never abandoned her training and eventually reached the 2nd Dan level. Her achievements were not a reason for boasting. Knowledge lived within her body, in the ingrained reflexes and in the confidence with which she calmly faced life. Helen Simmons recalled her first day at the new dojo as she grabbed her car keys, feeling as natural as mounting a bicycle. The Elite Martial Arts Academy was about 15 minutes away by car. The building looked impressive. Large windows, a modern sign, and a spacious parking lot filled with luxury cars caught her eye. Among shining SUVs and sports cars, her modest sedan stood out like a stranger. She noticed young people in stylish sportswear, fit and energetic, probably between 20 and 30 years old. Helen straightened her simple white kimono and stepped out of the car. At the reception desk sat a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a skeptical look. She glanced at Helen and asked with clear doubt how she could help. It seemed she could not believe that an older woman had come here for real. "I want to sign up for a jiu-jitsu class," Helen replied firmly and clearly. The young woman raised her eyebrows. She explained that adult classes were quite intense and suggested that Helen might prefer the Tuesday morning sessions designed for seniors. Helen smiled calmly and nodded. She said, "I have been practicing jiu-jitsu for more than 40 years, dear, and I want to continue training." A flicker of doubt briefly crossed the young woman's face, but she quickly composed herself and maintained a professional demeanor. In exactly 15 minutes, the open training session would begin. Beginners were welcome to watch and later discuss their skills with the coach for evaluation. "Excellent," Helen Simmons nodded. "You will need to sign these documents." The young woman handed her several forms. Coach David Johnson would assess their abilities. Helen confidently signed, without paying attention to the suspicious glance she received. As she walked toward the changing room, she sensed the administrator's stare, clearly wondering, what is a woman of her age doing here? Helen smiled to herself. This is far from the first time she's been underestimated. The main academy hall was spacious and brightly lit, equipped with new gear and pristine mats. About 20 students were already warming up, their movements precise and expressive. The sounds of footsteps on the mats and steady breathing filled the air. Helen watched attentively. She recognized all the techniques since she had practiced them thousands of times. The academy seemed exactly like the place she had been searching for. Suddenly, her eyes settled on the head coach. Andrew Johnson, around 35 years old, tall with a strong build, moved with a confident stride that bordered on a slight arrogance. His blue kimono, the badges from competitions decorated his uniform, and the black belt was tied perfectly. He walked around the hall, adjusting stances, demonstrating techniques, and receiving respectful nods from the students. When David Johnson's eyes met Helen Simmons, his gaze lingered for a moment, and a distinct expression appeared on his face. His mood shifted from surprise to a mocking smirk. He said something about the student with the purple belt. That student glanced at Helen Simmons and quietly snorted. Ignoring this, Helen stepped onto the tatami and bowed according to the dojo traditions. Gradually, the noise in the room died down. Everyone turned their attention to the elderly woman in the white kimono. "How can I assist you, ma'am?" David Johnson called out from the opposite end of the hall. It looked like she had come to the wrong class. Tai Chi for the elderly is held in a small room at the corridor's end. A soft wave of restrained laughter rippled through the room. Helen remained composed. "I came for jiu-jitsu lessons," she answered calmly, explaining that she had recently moved to the city and was looking for chances to continue her training. David Johnson exchanged looks with several senior students, and the outcome seemed clear. Some of them chuckled as David's smile grew wider. Training at your age, he did not even try to hide his skepticism. That's harmless, ma'am. But jiu-jitsu is a serious combat sport that demands substantial physical fitness. Our focus is competitive level. I'm well aware of what jiu-jitsu is, Helen calmly replied. I've practiced it since 1980. Another wave of restrained chuckles swept through the room. One of David Johnson's smiles took on a hint of condescension. Listen, Grandma, he emphasized, provoking fresh laughter. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is no place for beginners. We do not have time to teach the basics to those who might get injured. Helen remained motionless. Her gaze stayed fixed and unwavering on David Johnson. I understand your concern, but I assure you, I can handle this. Are you even able to stand up from the floor without help? Someone with a blue belt asked loudly. This sparked another round of laughter. David Johnson raised his hand, calling for silence, though it was clear he barely suppressed a smile himself. And what belt exactly do you claim grants you such skills? He said, putting special emphasis on the word claim. I make no claims, Helen Simmons replied calmly. My second dan was awarded by Master Hiroshi Tarasov in 1995. The name did not resonate with most students, but David Johnson's expression shifted briefly. Tarasov was a legendary figure in certain circles, although he avoided widespread fame. Yet David quickly regained his composure. Those were different times back then. The standards now are quite distinct. With a gesture toward the spectator area and a polite tone, he said, "Why not watch today's training from there? Maybe that will help you understand how demanding this is." Despite his courteous phrasing, the refusal was clear and firm. A hint of disdain filled the air. Some students were already broadly smiling, savoring the scene of an elderly woman taking her place. But Helen Simmons had not spent 40 years on the tatami, only to give up without a fight. I did not come here just to watch, she said, with a quiet yet unyielding strength that immediately hushed the room. I came to train. A slight tremor of a smile flickered across David Johnson's face for a moment. He was clearly unprepared for such defiance. Around him, the students stood, their eyes locking onto one another. The laughter soon transformed into an expression of curiosity. "Madam," David began, his voice sounding as if he were explaining something to young children. "We have specific requirements from insurance companies and strict safety regulations. I am not allowed to let someone into the advanced group without a prior evaluation." Helen nodded in agreement. "That makes sense. Then evaluate me," she offered. A soft laughter rippled through the hall. David folded his arms across his chest, his smile returning. It was clear he was enjoying the attention. "Are you really asking me to test you?" he inquired, theatrically raising an eyebrow. "That is exactly why I am here," Helen calmly replied. David turned to the students, shrugging expressively. "Looks like our schedule will change a bit today. We will have a special assessment." He beckoned a young man wearing a blue belt. "Mike, come over and assist." With a light confidence, Mike approached. He stepped forward, and David Johnson turned his attention back to Helen Simmons. "This is Mike Peterson, one of our intermediate students. If you really want to train here, prove that you can handle at least the basic techniques." Helen met his gaze calmly. "I would prefer to work with you, Coach Johnson." The room fell silent, and someone from the back quietly whispered, "Oh." David Johnson's expression changed. The smirk disappeared, replaced by a cold stare. "With me?" he repeated, losing his previous arrogance. "If you intend to assess my skills, do it properly," Helen declared. "You're the head instructor, right?" The challenge hung in the air. David Johnson found himself trapped in a difficult situation. Refuse, and you lose respect. Agree, and you have to engage in a physical confrontation with a woman who could be his grandmother. In any case, everything was out of his control. After a pause, his confidence returned. It was a chance to demonstrate how to behave in such awkward moments. He decided to perform a brief demonstration, politely making it clear that this place was not suited for her. "All right," he said, smiling. "Let's have a light sparring session. No more than 3 minutes to assess your agility." He addressed the group. "Please clear the central mat." The students formed a circle, freeing the space in the center. David Johnson removed his instructor's emblem and deliberately placed it aside. Helen Simmons, she positioned herself on the mat. Her movements were unhurried, yet remarkably fluid considering her age. "I will be very careful," David Johnson declared loudly, addressing the audience. "Only fundamental positions, no submission holds." "Are you ready, Mrs. Simmons?" he asked. "Helen Simmons," she responded. "Yes, and I am ready, coach." The trap was set. "Let's begin," David said, adopting a fighting stance. Silence settled over the hall. All eyes were fixed on the unusual pair at the center of the mat. David moved slowly in a circle. His actions were purposely restrained to create a striking impression for the spectators. "Now, we will practice the basic positions," he explained loudly, clearly aiming at the audience. "In jiu-jitsu, the main tool is leverage, not strength. This is exactly what makes this sport accessible to people of any body type." Helen reached for David's sleeve, intending to demonstrate a simple gripping technique. What happened next unfolded so swiftly that the student struggled to recall the exact sequence for a long time. As soon as his hand touched her kimono, Helen shifted her body slightly. Her palm gripped his wrist with astonishing force. Before David Johnson realized what was happening, she executed a flawless sleeve grip, disturbing his balance and forcing him to step forward. It was a classic setup, and he fell right into the trap. In the next moment, Helen sat down, her legs sliding swiftly forward. Grasping his ankle, she simultaneously shifted her hold from the sleeve to the collar, confidently pulling him forward while turning. Her movement was characterized by smoothness, precision, and devastating effectiveness. David Johnson, completely caught off guard, fell forward. As soon as his knees touched the mat, Helen Simmons had already assumed the mount position. This unexpected move from a 72-year-old woman against a black belt in his prime sparked a collective gasp of surprise in the room. "What is this?" Andre began, losing composure and trying to regain control. However, Helen had already progressed to the next stage. Her hands moved with finely tuned accuracy, setting up grips that could not be broken without proper technique. David Johnson, still processing what happened, made the rookie mistake of pressing directly against her. This was exactly what the experienced fighter had been waiting for. Helen's response was immediate. She expertly redirected his energy, creating a perfect opportunity to transition into a classic arm lock. David realized the danger too late. He tried to stand and break through the guard, but found himself trapped in a flawlessly executed hold. The grip was secured well before he could mount any defense. His arm was fully controlled by Helen Simmons. The pressure increased, leaving him no options. "I give up," David growled, slapping the mat with his free hand. The entire exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. Silence fell over the audience. The students froze, mouths agape in astonishment. An elderly woman had just compelled their formidable chief mentor to concede, and she did it so flawlessly that it deserved to be recorded as a training demonstration. Helen immediately released her hold, and with agility unexpected for her age, rose gracefully. She adjusted her kimono and bowed respectfully to David Johnson, who remained on his knees, his face displaying shock and confusion. "Thank you for the chance to test me, Coach Johnson," she said calmly. "I hope now there is no doubt about my abilities." Nobody uttered a sound. The impossible had happened, and everyone witnessed it firsthand. David Johnson slowly rose, his face burning with embarrassment and shame. The room was engulfed in a heavy silence. The students were so stunned they did not even whisper. The image of the undefeated mentor crumbled in a matter of seconds. "Who are you?" he finally managed to say. His voice lowered and lost its previous mocking tone. "I told you," Helen Thompson said quietly, adjusting the belt on her GI. Helen had a natural gift and was one of Master Tarasov's disciples. One of the senior students stepped forward, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. "Wait, Tarasov, isn't that the same Tarasov who trained champions in the tents? And you are the Helen Simmons?" Helen nodded modestly. "I was just one of his pupils." "One of his pupils," the young man exclaimed with excitement in his voice. "You were his best athlete. I read about you in old martial arts magazines. You were champion 3 times. The whispers spread throughout the hall about victories in the eastern region. David Johnson's expression shifted from embarrassment to realization. "That happened a long time ago," Helen Simmons calmly replied. "I never chased after fame. The practice itself has always meant more to me." David coughed softly, trying to compose himself. His pride had been hurt. Still, years of training had taught him some degree of humility, even if he rarely displayed it. "Miss Thompson," he said with a formal bow, "I must apologize. My behavior was disrespectful and unworthy of a mentor." Helen gave a slight nod. "We all tend to judge by appearances," David added. "It is part of human nature. The key is to be able to change your mind when new information surfaces." A girl with a purple belt stepped forward and exclaimed, "Mom, that transition to armbar was amazing. Could you show it once more?" Helen glanced at David, raising her eyebrows slightly. He fell silent, pondering for a moment before calmly nodding. "I believe today could be a lesson for all of us," he said, with genuine respect in his voice. "If only Miss Simmons does not mind." What was meant to be a routine training session unexpectedly turned into an impromptu masterclass. Helen demonstrated techniques with the precision that only years of experience can bring. Her movements were no longer as swift as before, yet her timing and control remained flawless. The most astonishing part was, her talent lies in explaining complex details in a simple and clear way, turning ordinary movements into genuine art. A subtle lean of the body provides better control, proper weight distribution, and patience when changing positions. David Johnson, it must be said, fully immersed himself in the process, asked thoughtful questions, and assisted in demonstrating the techniques. His initial hesitation transformed into sincere admiration. He began to grasp the treasure he had found in that dojo. Helen Simmons, with over 43 years of experience, was teaching during a difficult guard maneuver. She realized that jiu-jitsu is not about strength or speed, because those slip away. What truly matters is understanding the unchanging principles: leverage, timing, balance, and above all, respect for your opponent and yourself. The students listened intently. All previous doubts vanished. Their dojo now held something rare and precious, and they finally understood it. As the lesson ended, the atmosphere in the hall completely shifted. Students who had been skeptical about Helen's presence now approached her with questions and genuine curiosity. Every look they exchanged showed respect and a strong desire to learn. A newfound reverence emerged. Helen answered calmly and patiently, without any hint of arrogance, abundantly sharing her rich experience. David Johnson stood a little apart from the mat, his face focused and thoughtful. When the last student finished speaking with Helen Simmons, he approached her once more. "Miss Smirnova," he began. His voice lacked the usual false confidence he had shown before. "I would like to offer you a position in our elite team." Helen raised an eyebrow, surprised by the proposal. "We have several women's and children's programs where your expertise would be extremely valuable," continued David Johnson. "Your technical skills are truly impressive." "I did not come here looking for a job, Coach Johnson," Helen replied. "My goal was simply to find a place where I could continue training." Johnson nodded. "Of course, you will have full access to our facility whenever you wish. However, I hope you will consider sharing your knowledge. Even if you teach just one class a week, it would be priceless for our students." Helen thought it over. She had not expected such an offer when she stepped into the academy this morning for the first time. Her plans were simple: find a space to train, keep herself in shape, and maybe build a new community in this city, where she had to start from scratch. "I will think about it," she finally said, "but only if I can train here regularly." "Any condition," Johnson agreed immediately. "This dojo must remain a place of respect for everyone who crosses its threshold, regardless of age, gender, or appearance." Her gaze stayed steady and confident. What happened today was not. There had to be others like her, coming here to learn. David Johnson nodded quietly, accepting the gentle reproach with a maturity he had not expected in himself. This was a rule he had to abide by from his very first day. "I promise." When Helen Simmons was packing up her belongings, several students bowed to her respectfully. Such a gesture was usually reserved only for the head mentor. "See you on Thursday, Sensei Simmons," said a young girl with a purple belt. Her voice held a spark of hope. Helen smiled. On Thursday, definitely. As she approached the exit, she noticed a small group of elderly people intently watching through the glass window of the hall. They observed part of her impromptu lesson and were animatedly discussing what they saw. Previously skeptical, the administrator came over with an apologetic expression. "Ma'am, quite a few people are asking if we have self-defense classes for adult students. They are curious if you would be leading those." Helen's smile grew wider. "Tell them to come on Thursday," she replied. "Let's see what we can arrange." 3 months later, the elite martial arts academy had undergone remarkable changes. What once served as a training ground mostly for young competitive athletes had transformed into a more diverse and welcoming community. Twice a week, Helen led a highly popular fundamentals class, open to students of all ages and skill levels. The focus was not on competitive accomplishments, but on personal growth and the essence of martial arts. The enduring technical elements of jiu-jitsu have been the focus of Helen Simmons' dedicated efforts for many years of refinement. Remarkably, these sessions became the most sought after in the academy's timetable. Young students realized that training fundamental techniques under Helen's guidance greatly enhanced their abilities in matches. Older students appreciated her methodical approach, which allowed for steady improvement without the risk of injury. Significantly, their coach, Andrew David Johnson, consistently participated in Helen's sessions, often serving as her demonstration partner. His former rigidity transformed into genuine respect and a strong desire to learn. Helen Simmons once told a local newspaper journalist who was preparing an article about the exceptional coaching duo, "I have forgotten about pressure distribution more than anyone could imagine." On that day, the academy hosted a small internal tournament where fighters of various ages and experience levels competed. Helen and David Johnson acted as referees together, and between matches, Helen demonstrated key techniques using David as her partner, explaining to the audience where to focus their attention. "Notice here, it is the lever, not strength, that creates the opportunity for submission," she explained, while slowly performing a technical armbar with David. "This move is accessible to people of all ages and body types if executed correctly." Among the spectators, a group of elderly individuals watched with particular interest. They were participants whom the academy informally called the Silver Belts. They formed a growing community of older individuals inspired by the story of Helen Simmons. She turned everything upside down, admitted one of the academy's seasoned mentors. This example was not only for the older generation, but for each of us. Helen reminded everyone what truly matters in jiu-jitsu. In the center of the hall, she spotted a new visitor, an elderly man with a cane. He seemed somewhat hesitant, yet there was determination burning in his eyes. Helen smiled, recognizing the same anxiety in his face that she herself had felt 3 months earlier. Coach Tarasov noticed her gaze, followed the stranger's silhouette, and immediately approached to greet the newcomer, respectfully accompanying him to a spot. Some lessons go beyond technique on the tatami, Helen thought. If this story touched you, remember that appearances can deceive, and wisdom comes in many forms. Have you ever been underestimated or watched someone else treated unfairly? Share your experience in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe so you do not miss inspiring stories that teach us to look deeper. Tell us where you are watching from and which part of Helen's journey moved you the most. See you soon. Remember that respect is earned through actions and does not require proof. True mastery reveals itself through deeds, not words. The oldest tree in the forest stands firm on the deepest roots. M.